Ever wondered how some of the most successful tech companies nail their pricing strategy? Today, we are diving deep into the world of SaaS monetization with none other than James Wilton, a true pricing guru. As the founder and managing partner of Monivete and the former leader of McKinsey's pricing practice for startups, James has spent over 12 years helping businesses unlock their true value through smarter pricing and packaging strategies. Get ready to uncover the secrets behind pricing success that could take your startup to the next level. Welcome to another episode of our Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. So I hope you enjoy the show. James, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Ash.
Great. So, do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you, you would like to share with our audience?
I do actually. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is "Quality means doing it right when nobody's watching," which was a Henry Ford quote, and I think it speaks to me. I think in lots of professions, but I think particularly in consulting and building out your strategies for clients,
Mhm.
there are times when it would technically be very easy to take shortcuts and nobody would necessarily know. But I think for your own integrity and to making sure that you're really delivering a truly quality product, it means taking all those extra steps to make sure you have the robust fact base, you have the support, and you feel really good about what you're putting on the table.
Indeed, indeed. And then a lot of people also say that if you have your product speaking for itself, you don't have to necessarily sell it that loudly, isn't it? Because the product sell itself if the product is good with the
That's right.
quality.
That's right.
Great stuff. So tell me more about James Wilton. Why James has chosen this very niche space of pricing? Because I know a lot of people I interview on my show who are founders, not necessarily just for the in the SaaS space, but also in manufacturing and motoring, etc. And I have never met anyone who has said, "Oh, I nailed my pricing in the first place." You know what? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, like James would love to say that it was all part of the plan from day one, but it totally wasn't. I really drifted into pricing as a field, really. And I guess the way I got there was I've always been a consultant pretty much. I decided that I wanted to be a management consultant relatively early in my career. Worked for a couple of big firms in the sort of the generalist path. And I just kind of imagined myself continuing to do that, really. I really liked it. I liked the way that we worked. I liked sort of doing new things the whole time. And I just kind of thought, I'm going to stay along this path, work my way up to partner, and have that be my career.
Mhm.
But that kind of got derailed when I had my first kid in about 2011, and having a baby at home and doing a job that requires you to be on the road for about 4 days a week, as it did at that time, just wasn't sustainable, really. I mean, I barely saw my son apart from weekends within that first 6 months or so of his life, which wasn't what I wanted. So I kind of found myself in this quandary where I really liked the work that I was doing, and I kind of identified it as a consultant, but I just couldn't see how I could keep making this work. So I didn't know what I was going to do.
Mhm.
As things happened, I ended up getting headhunted by this internal consulting team for a big company called Relics, which owns Elsevier and LexisNexis and a lot of these kind of big old publication businesses, which around that time were getting more into tech and SaaS type business models. And this team focused on pricing strategy, which I hadn't really done anything of at that point in my career. I took a course in my MBA, but I was far from having any kind of expertise. But
Mhm.
really, I mean, the job was positioned to me as, look, you'll get to keep consulting, and you'll probably like pricing, and you'll get a much better work-life balance. So I decided to roll the dice on it, and as it turned out, I did really like the pricing content, right? I found it like it was really interesting. It was a lot more strategic than I think I thought it was going to be from looking at it from the outside in. There was tons of room for creativity as well. I mean, they talk about the art and science in pricing, right? And I really found that to be true. So I kind of got hooked pretty quickly and realized that was the area that I was looking for, that I really like doing. And I stayed with that team for a few years.
Mhm.
And after having done that, I kind of decided I want to go back into external consulting now under slightly different terms. Didn't want to go back to traveling 4 days a week, but I wanted to go back into external consulting, and I just wanted to focus on pricing. And really, that's what I've done ever since. I kind of got deeper and deeper into pricing, and deeper into pricing for SaaS and tech and growing companies as well. Ultimately, I was brought into McKinsey to lead the pricing service line for Fuel, which is the part of McKinsey that was set up to work with startups and scale-ups. And that led to me back in 2021 now. I decided to found my own consulting firm focused on that specific space called Monovate. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Awesome. And you know what, James? I have done so many times, so many mistakes while running my small SaaS startup, right? I have changed my pricing from $69 a month to 120. I have moved from 120 to $72 for a year. So you can see the jump happening there, right?
Yeah.
So what's the biggest mistake? So I'm gonna jump right into it because I want to utilize your time as much as possible. What's the biggest mistake you think you see the startups make when it comes to pricing their product?
Yeah, well, you're in good company, Asher. I think pricing's really hard, and it's emotional, and it causes a lot of fear and anxiety in people, right? So it is it's difficult to know what changes to make. It's difficult to know whether you're doing the right thing. So you do see companies make all kinds of mistakes. I would say a few things really stand out to me. I think the first thing is that companies often, when they're setting their pricing strategy, they don't think about what they're trying to achieve with it, right? They just think, I need a pricing strategy. I need to set a price. What is it? Without saying really, am I focused on volume? Am I focused on near-term revenue growth or long-term revenue growth or profitability, or all these different things that you might be focusing on? It's almost like there's an assumption that there is a right or a wrong way to price within a particular segment, right? Or if you have a particular type of business. And the reality is, if you have two companies which look exactly the same and are serving exactly the same customers, selling exactly the same thing, but they have different objectives, the right pricing strategy for them is going to look completely different. So I think one thing right out of the gate is that companies don't think, I'm trying to do this, therefore let's build a pricing strategy that helps me do this, as opposed to just saying, look, let me just pick a pricing strategy because I need one. So I think that's probably the first one I see. I think the second one is around price levels themselves. I think you could argue that people don't do enough kind of research into figuring out what their price levels should be and understanding customer willingness to pay and so forth. And I do think that's true, but also, cognizant that doing that is quite difficult and not everybody has the resources to be able to go do that. What I would say is it's a lot easier to set your price high and then to drop it either at the transaction or drop it over time later than it is to start low and then continually raise it, because people get anchored to the fact that you set a certain amount of price for a certain amount of value, and then moving it from there becomes difficult. And you do see a lot of new companies when they maybe don't have the confidence yet, or they feel like they have to price low in order to get traction. They tend to fall into that trap. It makes it more difficult to change that over time. They'd actually be, in most cases, far better off putting a high price, signaling quality, and then just giving promotions or deals from that. It'll make it easier to get to those kind of larger price levels later on.
So basically, you set the pricing high, and then you keep providing deals at different point. For example, Halloween, New Year's, Christmas, things like that.
Well, potentially, depending on the kind of business that you are, right? I mean, it means, what I'm saying is you should set, there are two different price levels that you should consider, right? There is your list price. So that's kind of like your sticker price. It's what the product technically should be sold for. And that should signal the value that it creates. And then there's the target price, which is the actual price that you end up intending to sell it for. So if you're in a consumer business and you have promotions that run cyclically, just what you said might happen, Ash, right? You might sort of say, I'm going to run these promotions and know that more price sensitive customers will buy it on those dates. And that's how I'll build my volume. In more of a B2B business, typically, it might mean that you're selling to a business and you say, hey, look, my list price is here, but because you're so valuable a customer, because we're building capabilities, blah, 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 we're going to discount it by X% and give you this price here. So you're
Mm.
still able to get to that lower price level that you might need to get to in order to make them buy it. But, you said my product's worth this, it's not worth this. So it won't be a surprise if in year 2, year 3, you start getting closer to this number that you originally set.
Got it. Got it. So I guess navigating to from this place, I think what I would love to know is about like how does a SaaS company determine the best way to package their product or offerings?
Yeah. How do you figure out that? Yeah, I mean, I would say when you start getting into packaging, you're starting getting into the structural elements of pricing, honestly. And I would say in most cases, the value from doing a pricing transformation is far more likely to come from changing the way that you price those kind of structural elements than about changing the price levels themselves. In fact, the structure actually helps you get to those higher price levels if you want to. And there's no real quick sort of magic bullet, like this is the way to find packaging. You really have to think about all of those things that we've started to talk about here. Setting your objectives is really important, as I've said. If you are looking for a lot of growth and maybe sort of long-term revenue optimization rather than small-term, then you generally want a really simple packaging system that's going to make it very easy to sell to customers. It's simple, they'll get it. It's not going to, involve a huge protracted sales process to explain how it works to customers. It'll make the buying much easier. Those kind of packaging systems tend to work. Whereas if your objectives are far more about profitability, you really want to be maximizing the value that you and the price that you get for every single thing of value that you are selling. So that'll push you to a far more granular packaging strategy. Right. So those objectives make a big difference there.
Big difference. Yeah. Usually the SaaS businesses have the services available where you can literally get the value instantly if you jump on it and sign up for a 14-day trial or something like that. Or sometimes you have a freemium model also. Yeah. I have seen, so for example, there are let's say take the Red Ocean example, email marketing providers, right? There are email marketing providers like MailChimp, constant content thing, platform like that, big giants, right? Their pricing is around, they start with a free model, 2,000 emails a month, and then you jump across like, I don't know, $39-$40, and then they have enterprise customers also because they cater to all the ICPs. Whereas for a founder who is starting up right now, he is just confused at how much value that particular solution actually brings to the customer's life because he's never understood it, getting into the market. What are the different ways that could be figured out from a founder's perspective?
Like how much value a customer would get from your product.
Yeah. It's
No,
a little bit of difficult situation, isn't it? If you get what, yeah.
It absolutely is. And honestly, in full transparency, I've worked with companies before that have very well established products, right, and been in the market for a long time. People paying a lot of money for them, and I workshop with these clients, and I ask them, so how do customers get value from your products? What is the value? And they have told me, with their eyes open, we don't really know. We don't really know why they're buying it for these prices and why it's worth it. And also they're kind of afraid to go and ask them because they're sort of worried about being found out, right? Like it's like people are buying their stuff without them sort of really understanding why it's worth what it's worth. So it's difficult. But I think the real way that you do that, and there are various mechanisms for doing this, is asking your customers, right? Within Monovate, we do a lot of pricing for early stage companies and newly launched products. And all of that research focuses on if you can get in front of a prospective customer and say, hey, look, imagine you have a product that does this, this, and this, so on and so forth. How does this create value for you, right? How would you think about the value for this? How does the value scale? What metrics are aligned to value, and so on and so forth, right? And if you can do that, you can understand, if you were trying to build a value aligned pricing strategy where the price is going to increase as the value increases, how technically would you do that? And if it is a new product in a space where you haven't got direct competitors, and so there isn't sort of an automatic, already established relationship between price and value that you can kind of tap into. If you don't have that, you can use those conversations to try to get to an estimation of what is the numerical value that this product will provide to customers of different type, scale, etc. And then if you're assuming a reasonable ROI, which is going to differ for different situations, what would be a reasonable price level to put for that level of value?
So
So,
mostly speaking with your customer would help, but you need to ask them right questions.
Exactly.
Right.
You need to ask them the right questions. Yeah. And you need to, and there's, you also need to understand that, there's a difference between actual value and perceived value as well, right? Like all products are going to have some kind of actual value that you may or may not know, but your customers may or may not perceive all of that value. And if they can't see it, they're not going to pay for it. So you have to sort of, understand, even if it has this kind of value, what's the way that you would have to position it and communicate it to them in order to get them to see the value, and therefore, have a chance of paying the price that they should pay for the amount of value that they're receiving.
Yeah. I don't know if you have ever heard about Mr. Alex Hermosi.
Don't think so.
No? So he's a guy who recently bought acquire.com. He's a very built up guy, millions and millions of followers. He has created this pricing strategy with actual value and perceived value, and then time to deliver the value. Some formula there, right? I don't exactly know, but I've heard about him that he is kind of like a very renowned name in this space. So, what are some key signals that suggests it's time to adjust your pricing strategy for a startup?
Yeah, there are a fair few. I would say, so a few things that I frequently hear from our customers, right? One thing would be some kind of signal is showing you that your pricing strategy is not working the way that you would want it to be, right? Like, for example, you're not seeing your customers' growth increasing year over year, right? Which a lot of companies are looking for. And the pricing strategy isn't set up to be able to drive that. That could be a reason that you would want to change it to something which is more growth oriented. There's also, you frequently hear customers saying things like, we feel like we're leaving money on the table. Nobody ever complains about our prices, which probably indicates that you're pricing way too low and there's something different there. Sometimes you hear them say, we've got to the point where it's too complicated. Our customers don't get it. They always push back against it. We end up discounting a whole bunch. So there are these kind of signals that would suggest whatever your pricing strategy is, it's not doing what you would want it to do, and therefore it would make sense to change it. But there are also several circumstances when you should just think about changing and updating your pricing strategy anyway. If you're in a growing company, then I'd say most of the time, if you haven't changed your pricing strategy for about 2 to 3 years, you've probably introduced a whole bunch of new features and capabilities, and your product's grown, and your market may even have gone different. May have different competitors now. So those kind of changes in both your product stack and your market mean that the situation has changed enough that even if your pricing strategy was set up perfectly 3 years ago, it probably isn't perfect for you now. So you just need to change it and make it work in the current situation.
Cool. And when you say that, okay, we determine that some of the customers are complaining about the pricing, so that means they think, or their perspective is, the value which our product or service is delivering doesn't actually get them the return on investment, what they're paying for, right? So that's a signal to reduce the pricing.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Again, like, it may be more about the way that you're pricing than about the price levels themselves, right? I mean, I always use my Netflix example for this, right? I mean, Netflix have increased their prices several times over the last few years, right? And I know there's a lot of customer fatigue with that. But theoretical example, right? If Netflix were to say, hey, we've just added a whole bunch of movies from the 70s and 80s to our platform, and therefore we're going to increase our price from, I don't even know what it is now, $10 a month to $12 a month. A lot of people wouldn't consider the 70s and 80s movies valuable, so they'd be like, I don't want to pay extra for those things. It's not valuable to me. But if they, for those same customers, if they said, hey, look, we're increasing our prices by this much because we've added a whole bunch of original content, and it's award winning, and great directors, blah blah blah, they might be more likely to say that's okay at that point. So it's not so much about the price point that you are charging in some cases, it's more about the justification for that price point. So whether that's through your packaging, through what you're charging for what capabilities and features you were charging for, whether it's the metric that you're tying your price to, so whether you're charging for users or usage, or just based on the size of the company that you are selling to, all those details can make a big difference as to whether you're actually going to end up getting the theoretically right price.
Right pricing. Yeah, yeah. And obviously you have to test run them to get the actual response. So can you share an example of a startup that transformed their growth trajectory with the pricing change or something?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I can't name them by name for the clients that I've worked with, but I can certainly give a kind of sanitized example. I think one of my favorite ones was already a relatively successful HR management company startup. They were growing pretty well, but they were pricing based on the number of employees within a company that they were selling to, and they gave payroll and benefit services and so on and so forth. They had 2 tiers. They were priced relatively similarly, and actually 95% of their revenue came from the top tier, which immediately screams to you price differentiation problem, right? Because if most of your customers are paying the most that you could possibly charge them for your product, probably means that at least a subset of them would have paid something more if there was either something else to buy for, or you maybe change the price level differences between the lower version and that higher version. So that was really the thesis of going in. It was like, how do we optimize our packages to price differentiate better? I will say when we went in and did the research for this particular company, we found out firstly there was a segment of their current customers which really did value this set of services and features, some of which were already there, some of which were being launched soon. They attached a huge amount of value for them and would pay significantly extra for them. So it's like saying we've got now this meaningful portion of customers who, if we can build this new tier around these new features and services, we have a very compelling way to make them pay higher prices year over year. So that was great in itself, right? That's something which most of the time, if you can add that compelling premium version, you could easily add 20-30% to a company's revenue, depending obviously on how you price it and what the size of the segment is. But I think even more excitingly with that company, there was a finding that there was a set of prospective customers, they weren't current buyers of this product, who valued a portion of what they were already offering, but not the other stuff. Like they were not interested in this entire separate use case here. So they wouldn't pay the price for their standard package, which included all this stuff, but they would pay something less than that if they just gave them just the bit of it that they wanted.
They wanted, yeah.
And this segment was really huge. I mean, it was a massive segment that they just weren't able to serve now. So they were able to build like a lower tier that would cater to this larger segment. So in addition to just being able to raise their average price of their existing customers by building this premium tier, they were also able to increase their TAM and increase the volume just through changing their overall pricing strategy. I think that's super interesting because pricing often gets thought of as something that is about profitability and just about raising your average price level, and actually structural pricing changes can increase your volume as well.
Indeed. And that gives me a lot of thought, food to think, right? Because not necessarily you can make quite a lot of money just by increasing your price, but you can actually make quite a lot by increasing your TAM, by reducing your pricing, depending upon the strategy you want to go for.
Absolutely.
And considering the AI and all, everybody's creating new AI SaaS softwares nowadays. What what trends are you currently seeing in SaaS pricing that founders should be aware of?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are two big ones that I would talk to right now. The first one is hybrid pricing, and the second one is pricing around Gen AI. So it's not really a pricing trend, as it is more of it's a trend of something that pricing has to deal with. So we could talk a little bit about both of those.
Mm-hmm.
So hybrid pricing, in case anybody listening is unfamiliar with that, is basically a term that's been adopted for a pricing model that's a combination of traditional subscription pricing. So, the kind of classic flat price, usually based on something easy like users or something, and a usage-based pricing component, right? So you're charging for the amount that a product's used. Now, I think this is really interesting because you go back a couple of years ago, I mean, usage-based pricing has kind of swung backwards and forwards for like the last decade, right? You get people get excited about it, and then there's a reaction against it and so on. It's very consistently been on the uprise for the last, say, about 5 or 6 years. And it looked like it was going to become the new norm and everybody was going to be doing usage-based pricing. But then there was a pullback recently. And it's because although a lot of companies think the idea of usage-based pricing is great, because a lot of products, the value doesn't really scale with number of users anymore because of all the automations and integrations and things that we have now. A single user can get a huge amount of value just by increasing their leverage for all this this tech. So the idea of pricing it on some usage metric that really does scale with the value is very attractive. However, right, not all usage metrics are linked to value. Not all usage metrics will grow naturally over time. And usage, a lot of measures of usage are very unpredictable, right? Like if you're pricing based on API calls or number of transactions or something, and you ask a customer, how many of these do you think you'll have this year? A lot of the times they won't know. I mean, because they're these abstract technical metrics that even if they theoretically think is linked to the value, they don't really understand them or understand what kind of volumes they are. And that would create huge uncertainty within your pricing if you were just charging for the number of these usage units per month, right? I mean, it could go up to a number that you never expected, and you could end up paying a huge amount that you would never expect to do. So I think because of that, there has been this pulling away from usage-based pricing. Also, when you're pricing on these transactional, measuring the usage per month and just billing that's not recurring revenue anymore, right? Because there's no guarantee of what it's going to be. It could go up or down. It's reoccurring revenue, and companies at valuation generally don't get the same multiples on reoccurring revenue as they do on recurring revenue.
Indeed.
So hybrid models fix this a little bit, right? And hybrid models basically says that there's going to be some component of it which is fixed and predictable, and there's some component which is based on usage. And there's a load of different ways of doing that. But I think, like, for me, one of the best illustrations of how this works is what's called a usage-based subscription, which means instead of just charging for whatever you used month to month on a kind of retroactive basis, you would define a few bands of usage and say what the price would be within these bands. And at the beginning of the year, you say to the customer, well, based on who you are, based on maybe what your historical usage have been, if you have it, I would expect your usage to be here. So I'm going to set your usage here. You're going to pay flat prices throughout the year based on this. And then at renewal, we'll change your price level at the end of that based on what your usage actually was. So now it is recurring because it's fixed and it's flat. And it only changes within that renewal piece. And it means that while your usage might be sort of jumping all over the place on a month-to-month basis, as long as it's relatively consistent on like a longer time period, you don't get those oscillations within that. So that's kind of it's a situation where companies can get the benefits of usage-based pricing, such as the growth orientation and the greater value alignment when it does work, but you don't have the same difficulties around recurring revenue and predictability for your customers.
Got it. So basically, you're saying that the current trend is hybrid pricing going on in the SaaS market right now, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, cool. And if we take an hypothetical example, right? Let's say if a company who is doing 10,000 pounds ARR, MRR, and then, okay, let me rephrase this example.
Yep.
When last year, when I launched a campaign on Product Hunt saying that we'll be selling a lifetime license for our platform, we launched it for $99. We usually charge $72 for a year, so $6 a month,
Hmm.
right? But then when we launched this, we sold more than 20 lifetime licenses. Yeah. This year, we I think 4x our features on the platform,
Yep.
but the core feature was still the same. But when we launched the lifetime deal, we launched it for $300
Hmm.
instead of $99. We sold one. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's a very good experiment to learn about, like, how the pricing actually works. Now, yes, we did a lot of work. Yes, we spent quite a lot of time to get all these features. Yes, we managed to get more traction because it's a B2B2C software.
Yep.
How do you think we should have approached it instead of going literally three times of the price? Because remember, $99 sold quite a lot of number of licenses, whereas
Yep.
300 just one. What we lacked? What was our mistake in that part?
Gotcha. Let me just check. I understand. Firstly, Ash, you were saying like you were charging a sort of $70 a month subscription.
$72 a
Yeah,
year.
a year,
Yeah.
and then you also offered a $99 permanent license. And then in this new position, when you've built all these extra features, you did the permanent license for 300. Were you still charging $72 for the subscription?
Yes. Our basic plan is 72, and then all these new features we build, we have 150, and then we have 320.
Got you. Got you.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Three
all
tiers.
these new all these new features were not in that $72 per year
No,
license. They were just in the higher version. But it's a one-time payment of 300 to get it for life, was what you were saying,
all of
right?
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So I think there's a few things to think about, right? I mean, one goes right back to product development, right? And I think a lot of the times we end up building features because we think customers want them and because we think they are valuable.
Mm.
But just because customers want them and think they're valuable doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to pay extra for them, right? So that's the one thing I think you can think about. That it doesn't mean that you shouldn't build those other features. Sometimes you should. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to charge more for it. There's analysis we do quite frequently where when we have a client who has several features, we'll go through and ask customers how they feel about them, right? Is this something which is kind of a nice to have, or is it like a need to have in whatever I'm buying, or is it something that's kind of differentiated and different, and if it didn't come as standard, I might be interested in paying more to get it? Or is it something which is, I can see the value there, but it's more than I would ever need?
Mm.
So I mean, if you can ask that for all your customers, and then think about how those classifications on average change across the entire spectrum of customers, you can kind of class your features as being things that are either core, so they're things which loads of customers value, but they're seen as kind of standard things that should just be included. There are things which are premium, and these are things that a lot of customers would find valuable, and also they'd be probably willing to pay extra to get them. And then there are niche features which are not that many customers think that they're valuable, but those who do would be willing to pay extra in order to get them. And then you end up with these kind of ancillary features, right? Which are nobody really wants them, nobody will pay extra for them. They're just kind of noise, right?
Mm.
So it may have been the case that you ended up building a lot of core features which the customers wanted but wouldn't have expected to pay anything extra for them. It may have been that they were kind of niche features, so there might have been like one or two people who would value them. You did sell one, right? But the majority of people wouldn't,
Mm.
and so on and so forth. So there's and that's a really good input to your packaging, because it helps you think about how you build tiers, how you think about add-ons, etc., etc.
Mm.
So there's that way of doing things. And of course, if you do have very specific capabilities or features that you're thinking of buying, you can also just try to get willingness to pay data on those as well and say, look, if I was to give you this, how much would you pay for it? And there are loads of different techniques that can be useful for that. I think two
Mm.
that I would call out as being useful in different situations here would be one, an oldie but goodie is the Van Westendorp technique. Like, I think you know that if you just go and ask a customer, how much would you pay for this? They're going to lowball you. So the Van Westendorp technique kind of gets around that by saying you ask for 4 different price levels. First, you say, if you were to buy this, what price level would you consider this to be a bargain?
Mm-hmm.
Now tell me at what price level you would consider this to be starting to get expensive, but you'd still consider buying it. Now tell me at what price level this is now so expensive that I would definitely not buy it. And now tell me at what price level is this so cheap that you'd assume that it, couldn't be worth. There's probably not any quality there that's worth buying. When you've got that right, you've got a range of pricing that could work for that customer. And if you do that over a set of customers, you've got how many customers would potentially buy it at these different price levels. And then based on your objectives, we talked about earlier, whether you're trying to maximize volume or revenue or profit or one of those with some constraints around the others, you can figure out where is the right price level to set it that kind of maximizes whatever it is that you're looking to maximize.
This is really cool, James, because what we've been doing is we've been just sending emails and asking our customers that, is this pricing right for you? That is all we were doing. But giving them this 4 different price level, or asking them this 4 different price level, gives us quite a lot of data. And I think if somebody is doing that survey for us, that is the pricing is right or wrong with yes and no, giving them an opportunity to input something in freestyle would be much better, because then we will understand more, right? So how important is pricing structure versus the actual price point itself? Do you have any opinion on that?
I don't know. I could give you percentages, but I would say the structure is more important than the price level in most cases. Like, in many cases, a good price structure will solve for getting a price level that you were struggling to get previously. Of course, the price level is still important, right? Because at some point, it's got to be the right price for the amount of value that you are providing, either just on its own or relative to the other alternatives that you have within the space. But the structure can help you get there more effectively if you don't have it.
Cool. Got it. Right. So before we move into our lightning round as such, I want to ask you this last question, which I usually ask my guests is, what are the steps a founder has to take in order to decide on the pricing before, launching the product? And then what are the steps the founder should do after being into the market for a year? So steps when they're launching, and then the steps after they've been in the market for a year.
Yep. So before they're launching, first thing, I know I'm like a broken record with this, but figure out what you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve as a business, and which of those objectives should your pricing strategy be helping you to achieve? And you're probably going to have multiple within there, right? So you have to think about prioritizing them. Which ones are more important than others for the pricing? Because you may end up getting a conflict between those. So clarifying your objectives is first. Secondly, understanding your customer base, right? It is really important for you to understand what are your customer segments, and within those different customer segments, what is the willingness to pay? What are their needs? How do they differ from each other? What are their buying preferences? How do they think about value? All of those things are vital pieces of information that you need to be able to understand in order to build a pricing strategy that's going to help you price differentiate across them and be able to sell to them in a way that's going to make sense for them. Mm-hmm. You need to understand your competitors. So, I would never suggest that a company should just copy the price levels or the pricing structure of their competitors. That is not what I'm suggesting. But you do need to understand it, because if you have competitors, then the fact that they're there and the fact that they're charging for certain configurations of things or a certain amount of value is going to affect how customers are going to engage with your pricing strategy and what they would pay for it. So you need to make sure you understand that as well. And then, of course, there's product factors as well. These are probably the easiest ones for most companies. They tend to know this, but how does your product create value? What are its functionalities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you've got all of that figured out, then you go through and start to build your pricing strategy, making decisions which are going to tap into all of those different areas, right? So you're going to have, what we usually do is think about what are the design decisions that you need to make, or the guiding principles that are going to guide what pricing strategy you would build. And start off with the structural stuff. So think about revenue model, which is, is it subscription? Is it a perpetual plus license model? Is it just a term license, etc.? What's the packaging? So how are you arranging your packages and what goes in each one? And what's your price architecture, right? So how are you scaling the price of whatever the product is, based on what metric? How does that scale? You build that structure first, then you put the price levels on it. And then it's really important also to think about what are the structures that you're going to have in place in the market to make sure you get those prices as well. So that usually involves things like discounting rules for your sales team if you're selling through a sales team, incentivizing them in a way that's going to encourage them to fight for price levels, and enabling them to believe that they can have price and value based conversations and win those negotiations.
Gotcha. And how much of these is relevant still once the founder has been in the market for a year?
Yeah. Once you've been in the market for a year, I'd say the structural stuff, unless you got feedback that suggests that your original structure was just not working, which hopefully wouldn't be the case if you did a good job of all that first stuff, it would really just be about truing up price levels, right? Because on a year-by-year basis, things do change. There's inflation. There's changes in the economy. There's probably shifts in your competitive set. It may make sense for you to tweak the price levels that you are offering on a year-by-year basis, but you shouldn't need a broad scale pricing strategy change. That's usually something that you do after it's been in the market for about 2 to 3 years, depending on how fast you're growing and how quickly things are changing.
Cool. Got it. And also, depending upon the technology, for example, some of the SaaS product just died after ChatGPT launched. So, it was just unknown. Cool. Great stuff. So let me reiterate through what we have learned today and maybe share this with our audience. What we discussed, that the most important factors for pricing for founders or companies involve the whole pricing strategy, involve objectives, what you want to achieve from selling that product or services. Very important part while you're defining your pricing strategy is connect with your customer, ask questions to them, ask that what kind of value they're receiving from this product or service. Potentially going towards hybrid pricing might help in 2024 because that's currently in the trend. And then the other things which we have learned today is make sure before launching your pricing strategy, you have understood how the value is delivered, how your competitors are putting the pricing out there. And important thing, never copy pricing, which I learned today. And then, going through the product quality, revenue model, packaging, pricing structure with which goes parallel with price levels, etc. And then obviously, which everybody talks about, deals, options, discounts, and all these sort of things which goes together. So yeah, that's something very interesting we have learned today about pricing. Is there anything else you would like to add into this one, James?
I think it was great coverage, actually, Ash. I love that you drew a picture. I think it's awesome. No, all good.
Perfect. Great stuff. So I think we have reached towards the end of our interview. So I've got like 6 quick fire questions for you. So if you are okay, then I would like to go through them.
Shoot.
Yep. Great.
Alrighty.
What's the top 3 strategies to come up with your pricing in 2024 for SaaS products?
Top 3 strategies for coming out, like the strategies to figure out what your pricing should
Pricing is,
be.
yeah. Yeah.
So if it was price levels, we're trying to figure out what your price levels would be. I guess I'll name 3 different techniques that you could use to figure out what the pricing should be. I will say there's historical deal analysis, so looking at the spread of where you've actually landed your deals. Obviously, that is going to be constrained, but you can see sometimes you'll discount less than others. So you can start to back into what for a group of customers that looks the same, what theoretically the price should be there. I think that's one. There is doing primary willingness to pay research. There's lots of different techniques, as we talked about. We talked about the Van Westendorp specifically, but there's conjoint and there's Garber-Granger, and there's all these different ways of arriving at price levels. And then the last bucket would be economic value estimation, which is really in those situations when you don't have direct competitors who you can just benchmark yourself off. You need to go out and figure out from first principles how much would how much value does a customer get, and then based on that, how much I should be charging.
Got it. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
Well, I have a book coming out in about a month, so I'd probably recommend that one if they can wait for a month. It's called Capturing Value, and it does work through all of the steps that we've talked about today, Ash. And it's written as a practical guide for someone who needs to build a SaaS pricing strategy. Tells you really what are the things that you need to know about the options that you have within each one of these different areas, and then how do you go through the steps of actually building it out once you've absorbed all those principles.
Cool. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
That's a great question. There's so many. I think being a continuous learner is probably the most important thing. I think having a growth mindset and being open to realizing that you don't know everything and changing your mind, going out and finding other perspectives that can help you. I think that really separates people who do really well from people who don't.
Cool. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Oh, personal productivity tool or habit. So one thing I've started doing, I got a standing desk recently, and I started getting my walks in while I'm in catch-ups and meetings where I don't need to be like looking at something in detail and stuff. That's actually saved a lot of time for me in the day. So I'm a big advocate of that.
Cool. No, I do have a hydraulic table actually, which goes up and down without electricity. So yeah.
Very nice.
Same here. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
So I've told my team about this. I have aspirations for creating an indoor play space within my home city of Saratoga. So it's one of these places where it's incredibly cold in the winter. Going to parks and things with smaller kids are, it just doesn't happen. I visited some of these play spaces. There's this kind of ideas. There's indoor play centers when I visited my parents in the UK. But they're all pretty awful experiences for parents, right? Like they're messy and it's not nice to be there. You just kind of endure it. It made me think, wouldn't it be great if you could take your kids to somewhere and there was like a nice sort of coffee house experience and it was very, very relaxing, very chilled out. There were people to look after the kids as they were playing there rather than you having to supervise them the whole time. I think that's something that actually parents would pay, a reasonable amount of money to get into, not just on a transactional basis, but you could probably do a membership model within that as well. So I guess if time and money was not an obstacle, maybe I'd pursue my dreams of doing that.
Yeah. I mean, there is a trend in London specifically going on right now. It's a gym for parents. So, with small kids like under 4 years old, you bring your kids with you because there's lots of single parents there. You exercise while they're playing.
Oh, that's a great idea too. Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Right. Last but not least, what's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Most people, and I guess most people in my life right now don't know the fact that I used to do a lot of stand-up and sketch comedy when I was younger. When I was at college, I did a lot of stand-up. I was in a comedy group at college. And I also ran my business school's Follies group for a year as well, creating lots of funny videos. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of doing that, but I never really found a way to integrate comedy and my work life, because I think if you want to do comedy well, it just takes so much time and prep and
Yeah.
practice to get it good, that I've never really found a way to do it while I'm working. Maybe I will one day.
Yeah, I literally interviewed one of the biggest podcast hosts of comedy last week.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, keep an eye. Yeah, I might be once the episode release. If you want to connect with the person, I am happy to help.
Yep, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Great, James. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking, all these secrets about pricing. If people want to get in touch with you or connect with you, what's the best way to do it?
Best way would be through my LinkedIn profile, which is James D. Wilton.
Cool. James, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and impactful work you're doing. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
I really enjoyed it, Ash. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Founders Podcast. I hope you found our conversation with James insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to search him, James D. Wilton, on LinkedIn and connect and throw all of your pricing questions to him. I'm sure he will help you. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.